I'm Saraya Wintersmith. Tonight on Greater Boston, Donald Trump found legally liable in a sexual abuse and defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. We'll discuss what this ruling means for women, survivors, and the 2024 election. Then, a group of Massachusetts mayors have come together to diversify public real estate projects. One of those mayors will join me ahead. Donald Trump has been accused of sexual assault and harassment by more than a dozen women since he first ran for president in 2016. Now he's finally being held legally accountable for one of them. A Manhattan jury found that Trump did sexually assault former magazine writer E. Jean Carroll after a lengthy legal process held up by a series of challenges from the former president. Carroll filed the civil suit back in 2019 after coming forward with allegations in an excerpt of her memoir published in New York Magazine, accusing Trump of sexually assaulting and raping her in a dressing room in a New York City department store in the mid-1990s. The six-man, three-woman jury found Trump legally liable for sexual assault and battery, but argued Carroll didn't adequately prove her allegation of rape. The jury also found Trump guilty of defamation over statements he made online calling the allegations a hoax and con job. After the ruling, Carroll expressed feelings of relief and vindication, writing, "I filed this lawsuit against Donald Trump to clear my name and to get my life back. Today, the world finally knows the truth." Trump responded.
What else can you expect from a Trump-hating, Clinton-appointed judge who went out of his way to make sure that the result of this trial was as negative as it could possibly be? We'll be appealing this decision. It's a disgrace.
Trump now has to pay Carroll more than $5 million in damages and confront the decision as he runs for another term as president. But how much will this affect him, really? And what does this mean for other survivors of sexual abuse? I'm joined now by Dr. Tina Opie, a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School and an associate professor at Babson College, and Jen Deadrick, author of She the People. Dr. Opie, Ms. Deadrick, thank you so much for joining us. It's so much to unpack with this case here, so much to unpack. It's the first time a former president is found liable for sexual abuse, and it's a civil case and not a criminal case. Trump's attorney, I want to ask both of you first, expressed sort of happiness that the president was vindicated of rape because that's not the charge that he was found legally liable for. Do both of you ladies consider this a victory for sexual assault survivors?
Absolutely, it is. I think Carroll herself put it well when she talked about that she wasn't the perfect victim, that it ruined the whole concept of the perfect victim, that she didn't scream, that she was sometimes happy in her life afterwards, all of those things that she mentioned, that women know that when you're confronted with something like that, situations like that, you don't always scream. You don't, often you freeze. Often it's someone that you admired, someone that you knew, someone that you thought was a friend or thought was a mentor or thought was a somebody, and you don't know what to do in that situation. And so the expectation that a woman who's a victim of something like this would do all the right things, would scream immediately, would back off, would immediately go to the police was always false. And so there's a big precedent set in that we don't have to expect that going forward from women who've been assaulted or men who've been assaulted.
Dr. Opie, are you making anything of the rape charge not being part of what the jury found Trump liable for?
Well, I don't want to be graphic here, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that the difference between rape and sexual abuse, which is what he was found guilty of, is penetration.
That's correct.
So the bottom line is he did something sexual that he was not supposed to do, and he was convicted of that. So that is a victory, because I believe he has been saying that none of this happened, and yet the jury found him unanimously to be guilty of that. So I think that that is something to celebrate, because my hope is that the truth has gotten out. Justice was served in the sense that he was found to be guilty. So I'm grateful for that. And his attorney, of course, is going to try to spin it. Well, he was vindicated of rape. Not so fast. He was found guilty of sexual abuse. That's not something that I would want on my resume.
Did either of you make anything of the fact that the jury contained more men than women like, did you find it encouraging, given that when we started looking at sexual assault through a different perspective with the rise of the Me Too movement, the discourse was difficult for some folks?
I think it is very encouraging that men were able to listen to her. I think that one of the things that, some people have been talking about how initially when the Me Too, this version of the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too movement, when it started, there was the argument that, well, we needed a lot of convictions to see that it was working. But what really needed to happen was that men needed to hear the stories and understand. I think for a lot of men, it was a shock to them. That they think, well, not all men have done something like this, but all women have experienced something like this. That there's something that, in telling those stories that we would just tell with each other, if that, we would just tell other women, that suddenly men were hearing those stories and understanding what women had gone through. And I mean, my mother was sexually assaulted here at WGBH while she was interviewing for an internship position.
Wow.
I mean, so it's funny that now I'm here talking about it all the time. And then it was during the interview, the guy kept grabbing her butt. And afterwards she said to her friend who worked here, he kept grabbing my butt while he was giving me the tour. And her friend said, oh, you get used to that, because she worked with him and he just did that. And so the fact that, that was the 60s, we have progressed, it wasn't as open, and now it's something like, oh, women have experienced that, and so the fact that now we have men who are able to look at a situation like E.G. and Carroll's and say, oh, clearly this was a violation, clearly she didn't deserve this, she wasn't dressed a certain way, she wasn't asking for it. That's a huge, huge step forward, I think.
I want to stay with you before I go to Dr. Opie. Was that person punished?
No, of course not. It was the 60s. Have you seen Mad Men? It's not, no. I think he maybe years later was, but I don't know. I'm not even sure who he was. That was just sort of part of the culture in the 60s.
Wow.
That's what young women were for. Yeah.
Dr. Opie, are we looking at this verdict as though we have made some progress, particularly when it comes to men hearing the stories of women survivors?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that there are men who are empathetic individuals who are fully capable of the full range of human emotion. I'm married to a man, and he very much demonstrates that. And my brother-in-law, my father. So I think we have to make sure, one of the things that, Jen, we were on the show, and I remember I got a lot of hate mail for talking about the fact that there is a wide array of men, but I did want some of the men to just give women a chance to experience the Me Too movement. Do you remember that, Jen?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot of hate mail for saying, let's just let women have a chance to experience this. And now I think we're coming full circle where we can say there are men who are empathetic, fully developed, and emotional human beings. I want to make sure we give men credit for that. This is an opportunity for us to come together. There are far more men out there, I believe, who are disgusted by this kind of behavior. And I think culturally, normatively, we need more men to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. So when, now in 2023, if you see someone being interviewed and the man who's doing the interview, maybe they're not pinching her on her butt because you would get sued, especially after we've just seen some of the verdicts that have been happening. But maybe, I don't know, something else happens. I'm hoping that more men would actually stand up and say something, because the bottom line is a culture of sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, that is only going to change if we are in solidarity with each other. This is not something that women can resolve on their own. And no, I'm not saying that women are victims. What I'm saying is this is a societal issue that's going to require all societal members to resolve it.
Yeah, I agree. It's got to, if without men, it's just us all the time in defensive mode, just constantly. And we need them to be stepping up, and I mean there is a long history of men doing things with the excuse that they were protecting women. So we do have to be careful to not slide into that. I mean, you have, like the worst case example, the Klan would say, well, we're protecting white women from black men, right? And that was why they would lynch them. So there is a balance where we don't want men riding in, as like our saviors, but we do want them to be aware of what's going on and what it's like to experience things for us.
And to your earlier point, men experience sexual assault
Exactly.
also.
Yes, yeah.
Dr. Opie, I want to go to you.
Yeah.
This is, of course, just one of several legal cases that the former president is facing, even as he seeks the Republican nomination for the 2024 election. Do you have any thoughts about how this might impact his political career?
Well, ironically, I was shocked to hear that there are some Republican leaders in office right now who have said that this makes them want to vote for him twice as much. Yeah. And so, but there are other people who I believe Mitt Romney and some other Republican leaders who have said, look, this renders him completely unfit to run for office. So my hope is that there will be some Republican officials who stand up, they will be upstanders and say, listen, enough is enough. The man has been impeached twice. He's been indicted. He has now been convicted of sexual abuse and defamation. There's so much drama associated with him. I mean, there's other things associated with him too. We won't even get into those, okay? But there's so much drama associated with him. Let's just nip this in the bud and pick someone else. I don't know if that's going to happen. I believe, unfortunately, I don't know if he has things on people and he's able to hold this over their head. I don't quite get what the cult of personality is. I would have cut bait a long time ago, but I'm hoping that this will be the nail in the coffin, but I'm not optimistic about that given what I've heard is already beginning to happen with some of the Republican leaders.
Ms. Deadrick, to her point, we've known for a long time about accusations against Trump, but does the verdict, the liability verdict, you think, draw a line that makes him untenable?
Well, I mean, he bragged about doing exactly this on tape, and we all heard it before he was elected in 2016. So it's, you know, he seems to be able, he was put in there he was voted in to get rid of Roe v. Wade, which he did, to get rid of certain things, environmental protections, which he did. And I mean, nothing in his political base, is anything different than most Republicans. And so they saw him as someone who actually managed to get things done because he was shameless. And so I think that that's really and I do think there are plenty of men out there who think that's why I'd want to get rich and famous, so I could grab women and so I could have any woman I wanted and no one would be able to do anything. I think that is a thing that a lot of people wish for, honestly. And so, and he speaks to that. And then, and he can just pretend like he's just being targeted anyway. Even though, as I said, he bragged about it, but now he can pretend. But his whole thing is about lying blatantly. It's a fascist approach. It's an authoritarian approach. You lie, you get away with it, and people are not sure of what the truth is anymore and don't feel like the truth matters anymore. The one great thing about this verdict is that the truth mattered in this verdict. And he actually got convicted and he's actually seen consequences of his actions, which he never does normally. Hasn't his whole life. So, he was a spoiled rich kid whose dad just bailed him out all the time. So he's facing consequences now. But yeah, I think his fans they're
going to stick by him.
They love him. They love this about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, they do.
Are either of you, it doesn't sound like it, but I have to ask, are either of you put off by this being a civil case and not a straight criminal one?
Well, it was the option she had. So, would I love it if it was a criminal case and he could be locked up for it? Lock him up, right? I mean, sure, that would be a great irony after calling for Hillary's, being locked up for all those years. But, but you take what you can get. We still have, I was talking, the woman who gave me my blowout today is from India.
It's very lovely.
Thank you. She's from India, Nita, and we were talking about Modi and how Modi is the Trump of India. He just he literally locks up his political opponents. And so, and I thought, okay, well, so here, we actually still have the power to, people in power are accountable still. And this shows that. We still have that. And we have the ability to hold people in power accountable. It's just taking a long time.
Dr. Opie, does E. Jean Carroll see any of that $5 million she's now owed?
I don't know. I mean, 45 has a long history of being taken to court and tying people up in court for years and years and years. And he has a network of attorneys and financiers who are incredibly adept at tying money up. So I don't know. I hope she does. I hope that she does, but I'm not certain because unfortunately he is very adept and wise about, or I shouldn't say wise, but he's very adept about the circuit's legal system. So he may be able to prevent her from ever seeing a penny of that money. But my hope is that she gets to spend every dime.
No, yeah, me too.
The last thing that I want to pose to both of you is that the former president has already tied the case to partisan politics. I think you mentioned, he pointed to the political makeup of New York and claimed that the case is part of the phrases like the biggest witch hunt in history. It's a ruse created to impact the next election. You both are voters in this country. Just how does this case and that sort of rhetoric impact your view of politics in this country right now?
It makes me want to vote. I almost want to go to another state and make sure everyone is registered to vote. I want to make sure everyone in Massachusetts is registered to vote. This activates and energizes me because what it does is it makes me realize the gerrymandering that has happened, the voting is pretty much one of the only remaining tools that we have to prevent authoritarian and fascist people like 45 from getting into and remaining in power. And one of the other things, Jen, you mentioned all of the accomplishments that the Republican base wanted 45 to accomplish. The other thing was the Supreme Court justices. And given that deck that he has arrayed, I'm very concerned about the political landscape. So voting is essential. So what has this done? This has energized me. I hope that it energizes more people. Whatever your political background, we need to get people to vote. I think, less than 50% of the populace votes in any given election, even including the presidential election. We have got to change that. I would love it if we could just say people are automatically registered to vote, like they do in some countries. You have to opt out. So, if there are people listening who are in the legislature, let's start to make that happen so that it can be easier for people to vote. And I know I've probably just offended many of the people who are actually actively working to make it more difficult to vote.
Ms. Deadrick, brief final thought.
Oh, about all of it? Well, I do. Obviously, I think it has, it may be too late. We do see greater voter turnout happening. We see people standing online for 6-7 hours, in states where they're attempting to make it harder. We did manage to prevent the red wave that always sounded like menstruation, so it was weird that they wanted that in the first place. But anyway, and so but it's the Republicans have done a really good job of setting things up locally so that to make it harder to get things done nationally. And so we're undoing that it's going to take a long time. And it's also about voting, and it's also about patience as we work through it and try to overturn the stuff that they've done. There's a lot that has to be undone now.
All right.
Yeah.
Dr. Tina Opie and author Jen Deadrick.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having us.
Next up, minority and women-owned businesses make up less than 1% of all real estate assets in the Northeast. A dismal number a group of local leaders are hoping to address. A coalition of mayors from Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Salem, and Lynn, along with Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, signed on to the Commonwealth Development Compact. It pledges to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria in public and private real estate projects within those cities. The initiative is a pilot program from the Civic Action Project, co-founded by former Mass Gaming Chair Steve Crosby, the Boston Society for Architecture, the Eastern Bank Foundation, and the Builders of Color Coalition. I'm joined now by the Executive Director of the Builders of Color Coalition, Colleen Fonseca, and Lynn Mayor Jared Nicholson. Colleen Fonseca, Mayor Nicholson, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So to start, can one of you explain your taking a beat from the Massachusetts Port Authority with this compact? Colleen, we'll start with you.
Absolutely, yes. So right on point, we are taking the lead from generations of work and decades of work that led up to the Massport model being implemented, and calls from leaders in the real estate industry as well as real estate developers of color calling for more advocacy and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the real estate industry. From there, Steve Crosby, the leader of the Civic Action Project, took up that call and initiated the Commonwealth Development Act, and then enlisted the support and help of the Boston Society of Architects, the Eastern Bank Foundation, and then my organization, the Builders of Color Coalition.
Excellent. And Mayor Nicholson, tell me, it seems like a simple question, but I have to ask, how is it that diversity or a company's diversity is going to strengthen the projects that it puts forward or the cities that the projects are located in?
Well, I think projects from the city's perspective are really important to the city's future, and they shape the place that we have in our community. But we ultimately are thinking about the people that are involved, the people that benefit, that do the project, that are working on the project, the owners of the companies, and also the people that end up living in these developments and working in these developments, and the neighbors of those communities. And we're a diverse city, and we want to make sure that our population is included in the benefits from all this work, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are an important part of that.
How are you guys looking to define diversity?
Yeah, so what's really great about this Commonwealth Development Compact is there are 4 commitments that each of the cities are signing on to. And through diversity, equity, and inclusion, how we're sort of characterizing diverse folks are women and people of color as sort of underrepresented in the commercial real estate industry. And we're really taking a lot of, in terms of diversity, the interventions that we're looking at can be anything from ownership, joint venture opportunities, who are the contractors that are working on these projects, to job training programs and internship programs that firms are putting together to diversify their workforces. So we really want to get a more comprehensive look at what is really happening around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the many interventions that are available to development companies to do so.
And Mayor Nicholson, sometimes when we take steps towards diversity, we get a little bit of pushback. Have you heard any? Are you expecting any as you sign on to the compact?
No, I mean, I think that the Massport model has been really held up as a standard for the industry, a goal for the industry, and I think what is also helpful is that a lot of these communities that have signed on have been having these conversations throughout. So Boston's done some great work on this. I know for us, we went through a big conversation as a community a couple of years ago in adopting a housing strategy for the city that at the time, was controversial, but I think we had some really good discussions about it, and stating explicitly that bringing an equity lens to development was a goal of the city was something that the city council signed on to, and I think has been really broadly adopted.
I want to talk a little bit about metrics and goals. What would scoring a diversity plan from a developer look like?
Yeah, so currently through the compact, we're going to be collecting data and information from various different sources. So in terms of what developers will be sort of asked to disclose, very similar to the BPDA's recently instituted BPDA optional DE&I disclosures, we are asking for cities and towns to ask for developers that are submitting projects on private land to disclose what are the interventions that they have in place. We're still working working with our compact partners to determine exactly what that will look like. This is a pilot year, but we do imagine at the bare minimum there will be narrative-based questions very similar to the structure that we see coming out of the BPDA. And in terms of public land, we are asking, and all of the cities will be adopting a 25% of their entire RFP process. So their scoring criteria for public land will include 25% of those points going towards issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And then staying with what we might see come from the pilot year, I'm just thinking about Boston's separate but related resident jobs policy and the fact that it's been in place for years, but we've only seen the first sort of fine to go towards a developer, like a repeat offender, in this year. Are you guys thinking about penalties for folks that don't do the voluntary disclosure?
At this time, no, we are not looking into penalties. I think one thing that we're really keen on is we know that there's activity happening on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front in these development firms, and we'd like to share and circulate and elevate that work that is already happening. So that's not to say, like, in the future that may not be something, but I think that's ultimately up to the cities and towns as they see fit. At this time, and as part of the compact, we are very focused on the cities and towns asking developers to optionally submit this information. So no discussion of penalties.
Mayor Nicholson?
Yeah, I think that particularly around the public land, we're in a position where these are not your typical private transactions. The entire community is implicated. And in the way that we're setting up this compact, it's empowering communities to really state aspirationally what they would like to see and invite people who want to be a part of the project to provide their aspirations and encourage folks to do that, and then we get to pick among those. So it's really a carrot approach from that perspective.
John Chesto with the Boston Globe wrote that the disclosures of the diversity plans are voluntary for now, based on legal advice. Is it fair to say that companies who don't demonstrate, like, openness towards this initiative will have a harder time pitching development projects?
I think that if you make it voluntary, then by definition you're allowing and inviting proposals that don't do it. But one of the nice things about the compact is that there's multiple components. So you have the public land aspect of it. You also have a component of it that is asking cities when they're in the earlier stages of projects and thinking about what's going to happen with the product overall to broaden the criteria of what would be helpful from the city's perspective. So obviously development is really important because it creates good paying jobs, it creates much needed tax revenue, but then thinking about what are the impacts on the neighborhood, are there spaces that are going to be created that are going to help our equity goals in other contexts. It sort of gives us the tools to push our goals around inclusion in different ways.
And Colleen Fonseca, I will let you have the last word here. What would you like to see a year from now?
What we'd like to see a year from now is a comprehensive pilot that we can sort of look to other cities and towns and know these are sort of the data metrics, how this pilot has impacted positively the commercial real estate industry and also has facilitated access for more diverse developers, investors, GCs, and just folks across the commercial real estate industry to meaningfully participate in this very powerful industry here in the Commonwealth.
All right, Colleen Fonseca, Mayor Jared Nicholson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. I'm Saraya Wintersmith. Good night.
Hey folks, Billy Costa here.